Thank you very much. I come from the warm heart of Africa, known for the warmth of its people and the warmth of its climate. I was happy to come yesterday and find that Sweden is not so cold, but I've changed my mind about it today. I want to thank Gnerd and your team for working with the Norwegian ambassador in Malawi to get me here, and I don't take that for granted. Thank you. You'll be surprised how many forums are happening around the world, whether it's private sector, government, NGOs, international communities and institutions talking about smallholder farmers, and yet without involving them. So it's a pleasure for me to be here and an honor. I was asked to talk about combating food and nutrition insecurity by enhancing sustainable agriculture in Africa. But because smallholders like things to be simple and bite-sized, I'm titling this Food Today and for Generations to Come. I will talk about the importance of agriculture in Africa, about the challenges that are facing today's agriculture, what needs to be done by all of us here, and then I'll conclude. Background to African agriculture: employs 70% of the workforce. It's an engine of economic growth with 60% of rural livelihoods and 35% contribution to GDP. Very significant in export earnings. In Malawi, more than 80% of our export earnings come from agriculture. And it's estimated that in 2012, $40 billion was used by Africa to import food. We have a love-hate relationship with governments because they're very good at intention, but they're very, very poor at delivery and at implementing what they've promised. African governments promised each other and the world in the Maputo Declaration of 2003 that they are going to spend a minimum of 10% of their national budgets on agriculture in order to achieve a 6% growth. And less than 7% of national budgets right now are being spent on agriculture, despite 70% of the people living in the rural areas. At the last count, only 8 out of all the countries in Africa are spending more than 10% of their budgets on agriculture. What are the challenges that are facing agriculture right now? Reduced farmer productivity, basically because most of you here working with smallholder farmers do not want to involve smallholder farmers in the planning, in the decisions, in the processes, in the systems. You treat smallholder farmers as beneficiaries, and therefore they are only involved at the end of the process instead of involving them right from the beginning. I put it to you that smallholder farmers are not beneficiaries. They are a very productive entity. They are a powerful force that needs to be unleashed in order to feed Africa and the world. For that, they just need a little bit of support. But that support has to start right from the beginning, not at the end of your planning and your processes. There's a lot of natural resource degradation, poor access to markets, limited investments, a lot of shocks, climate change, financial shocks, political shocks, and the doctors this morning very ably told us about the diseases. In Africa, it's mostly HIV and AIDS, malaria, and TB, which are communicable. What needs to be done? We need to embrace sustainable agriculture, looking at competing factors of production, the land pressure that is there, and the population increase that is there. In Malawi, our population increase is 2.8% per annum, which is very, very high. Last year, they tried to introduce a bill to limit family size to 3. Right now, it averages at 5, and the bill was thrown out of parliament. Sustainable agriculture, what are the challenges? The high population growth is leading to environmental degradation. There's limited access to production inputs and services, limited land under irrigation, and as a result, we are not producing enough to eat because the weather patterns have changed. We used to have consistently 4 or 5 months of rainfall in the year. In Malawi, for example, nowadays you can have 3. Either it comes early, it comes late, or sometimes you have a mid-season drought, and yet 1/5 of our country is water. And sometimes we are having to import food. There's a situation of water courses of those areas where irrigation was done, inadequate sector capacity, and poor farmer organizations. Limited investments in agriculture. A lot of banks in Malawi, for example, are spending less than 10% in smallholder farmers. Although we are saying that agriculture is the backbone of Malawi and other African countries. And smallholder farmers are accessing credit at very, very high interest rates. Right now, industry, private sector can access at 34%. Smallholder farmers are accessing at 41%. Sustainable agriculture pillars: low carbon technology, resource use efficiency, social inclusive growth, so that you have innovation, productivity, and employment. Key focus areas in these: we need to look at local food security and sovereignty. We need to look at abundant, safe, and nutritious food. Under the environment, we need to reduce harmful inputs. We have to have sustainable and reduced energy use, reduce soil erosion, improve soil fertility, minimize use of land and water, enhance farm biodiversity, and under economic factors, viable farm and rural communities, and make it affordable. Here are some examples of some innovations and sustainability strategy that we are doing as an organization, NASFAM. Minimum tillage, reduce use of the hand hoe to till and till, or even the plow to till and till every year, creating a hard pan that affects productivity. Drip irrigation, so that you are actually aiming where the water should drop, so that you have more crop per drop. Manure making, to improve the health of the soil, so that even with inorganic fertilizers, your productivity can increase. Tree planting, to improve the environment, so that the weather patterns can come back to what they used to be. Vetiver grass to hold the soil, so that you have soil conservation. Water conservation: a lot of rainfall comes in Malawi, between 600 and 1,000 millimeters a year, but most of that just washes down. It has been said that the biggest export of Malawi is not crops, but soil, going into Mozambique and into the Indian Ocean, but we don't even get 1 cent for it. Conservation agriculture with fertilizer trees. We are working to have total landscapes, so that you have crops and trees growing together, and the Fadebia abidia is one of the trees that is doing very, very well in Africa to mix with crops. A lot of people have a romantic idea about smallholder farmers. In Africa, smallholder farming is a drudgery. You are using the hand hoe to try and cultivate 2 hectares of land to feed your family and to take food to the market. A smallholder farmer, most of the time, it's a family with 6 children. Over and above their own children, they are taking care of 4 or 5 orphans because of mainly HIV, AIDS, and so on. And a lot of times, they are working independently as subsistence farmers. So what is required is that we should mobilize and organize smallholder farmers. First of all, we need a paradigm shift to change farmers from thinking subsistence to farming as business. And this paradigm shift is not just for the farmers themselves, but for all of us here. We have to help smallholder farmers to realize that farming is business, and it needs to be approached in a business-like way. They can't do it working independently as individual farmers. They have to do it in a collective, cohesive group, and hence, we have to support them in forming farmer groups, whatever they are called, whether they're clubs, associations, cooperatives. I know that in East Africa, for example, you can't talk of cooperatives. They used to be there, but they abuse resources, they abuse the democratic governance, and therefore, cooperatives is almost a swear word. But whatever form you take, we have to support farmers to form cohesive groups. When they are in cohesive groups, then they are an entity that has a voice. They are an entity that governments can work with on the policy front, that private sector can work with, because private sector is frightened about reaching out to millions and millions of smallholder farmers that are spread so far into the countryside. But when they are in cohesive groups, you can now start talking big business with them. You can reach them with finance, you can reach them with extension, reach them with markets, and with research. A big percentage of smallholder farmers are women. They do 60 to 80% of agriculture production, and yet they own less than 2% of the land. They receive less than 10% of the credit that goes into farming. And they have very limited access to extension because most of the extension services are provided by men. And they have limited access to markets. Most of the time when you're trying to diversify crops, groundnuts, for example, in Malawi, used to be called a woman's crop. Because of the way that it is grown, it was not making that much money. When we started working with ICRISAT to try and introduce controls of aflatoxin, aiming for the markets and so on, groundnuts started making money. And it didn't become a woman crop anymore because the men took over. And most of the time, when they have made money from the crop, they don't take it back to the family. They have other uses for it. So we need to engage women because they are the majority producers in the countryside. We need to engage youth. It has been estimated that in Africa, the average age of the smallholder farmer is 65. And we saw the doctor with his demographics there. We need to engage youth in agriculture. But youth don't want to be engaged in agriculture. Why? When you are in school and you do something wrong, one of the best punishments that teachers give you is to give you a hand hoe and go outside and cultivate. Even at home, when you do something naughty, because now they say we shouldn't be whipping our children, you give the child a hoe to go and do something outside, manual labor. So youth grow up treating agriculture as something that is a drudgery. They don't want to be engaged in it. So we should get the young and the youthful interested in agriculture. Even our education systems, instead of teaching young people how to go and find a white-collar job, we should be teaching them about the value chain in agriculture. We should be involving youth in the extension services, in infrastructure, in weather systems. We should involve them in logistics, storage and warehousing, processing, quality management, weather-based insurance, new products and services, branding, marketing, and exports. This is something that is more sexy for the youth. And if they are involved in the market information and website development and so on in agriculture, they will be more attracted to stay in agriculture instead of graduating and gravitating to the urban areas where they cause a lot of problems socially. I challenged people 2 years ago at a certain forum I was involved in that the UN must declare the hand hoe as a weapon of mass urbanization because it is forcing people to go into the urban areas in search of greater opportunities and employment. If you want to be involved with smallholder farmers, this is something serious that you need to look at. You need to study and see how you can get engaged. We need to create an enabling environment. In the blue columns, men, blue is right at the top there. We've been accused that men are colorblind. Land and property rights, infrastructure, governance and commercial laws and enforcement, trade rules and competition policy, the competition itself, we need fair competition, natural resources management, gender roles and behaviors, social norms and informal networks, quality, standards and regulation, and the studying of consumer trends and what the consumers are demanding. They want more healthy food and yet at a cheaper price. Every time there are price spikes, the consumers go on the streets and the governments change prices. And yet smallholder farmers, who are the producers, every time they complain about prices, nobody listens to them. In the middle there, market chains, primary producers are the farmers, but there has got to be involvement with traders, processors, exporters, importers, retailers, and also the local, national, and international consumers. Then market services at the bottom there. We have to look at the production. We have to look at finance, transportation across the chain, and develop business development services. Even more detailed, this is something all of us should be looking at and seeing what can be done and what should be done. Care pathways theory to change. We want more secure and resilient livelihoods for the smallholder farmers so that they can cope and adapt to climate change and other shocks, so that at the end of the day, they are giving us more food that is safe, that is nutritious. 4 gears of change: capacity, access, productivity, and household influence. We should all look at this and see where we can be engaged. We have to have an enabling environment that allows the smallholder farmer right at the center of the processes that we have, so that they are better able to do what they do better, they do well, which is farming. In conclusion, smallholder farmers can optimize, can be used to do sustainable agriculture. But they need a bit of support, they need a bit of help from all of us here. They shouldn't be involved at the end of processes, but right at the core of processes. We need to change the mindset from subsistence to farming as business. We need to mobilize them into cohesive groups, integrate them in the value chains, increase agricultural investments, and strengthen PPPs. And in Africa, it has already started with the G8, New Alliance for Food and Nutrition Security, where PPPs are being used to try and bring food and nutrition security. In ASFAM, we believe that the future belongs to the organized, and that's our motto. Because if you're not organized as an individual, if you're not organized as a community, as a family even, as a group, as a nation, then you have no future. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention.